My in-laws called me useless after I lost my job, so I got a better one in another city and blocked them from the guest list. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and last year my entire world collapsed in the span of a single phone call. My boss called me into his office, his face tight, his voice clipped, and before I could even sit down, he told me they were letting me go. Downsizing, he called it. But all I heard was the sound of my identity crumbling. I had given 5 years of my life to that job, working late nights, missing birthdays, sacrificing sleep, and suddenly, none of it mattered. Walking out of that building, cardboard box in my arms, I felt like a ghost of myself. At home, I tried to mask it. I told my wife it would be fine, that I'd bounce back quickly. But the truth gnawed at me. We had bills piling up, rent due, and the quiet fear that maybe I wasn't the man she thought she'd married. Nights became endless spirals of job applications, rejection emails, and a silence so heavy it felt like another person in the room. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment in my boss's office, wondering if I'd missed some sign, some warning that everything was about to collapse. The worst part wasn't the loss of income, it was the loss of dignity. I found myself shrinking at family gatherings, avoiding questions like, "So, how's work?" My palms would sweat, my heart racing because I had no answer. I'd never felt so small, so invisible, like a man stripped of every ounce of pride. My wife's quiet sighs when she thought I couldn't hear them cut deeper than words ever could. But as broken as I felt, I knew this was only the beginning of something darker. Because losing my job wasn't the only battle I was about to face, it was just the first crack before the whole foundation of my life gave way. The first time my in-laws called me useless, it was like a slap across the face. We were all seated around their polished oak dining table, the kind of dinner where laughter usually fills the air. But that night, after a few glasses of wine, my father-in-law leaned back in his chair, looked straight at me and said, "A real man provides. What kind of man lets his wife carry the weight while he sits around at home?" The words hit like shards of glass. My cheeks burned hot, but I forced a tight smile, pretending I didn't hear the snickers from his brothers. My wife sat frozen beside me, her fork halfway to her mouth. She didn't defend me, not then. I kept waiting for her to say something, anything, but the silence stretched long enough to suffocate me. Her mother chimed in next, shaking her head dramatically. She should have married someone more stable. We warned her. The room erupted with a mix of pitying looks and smug smiles. Every bite of food in my mouth turned to ash. My stomach twisted, my chest heavy with humiliation. I wanted to vanish, to sink beneath the floorboards rather than sit there being dissected like some failed experiment. On the drive home, the air between my wife and me was thick. Finally, I whispered, "Why didn't you say anything?" She stared out the window, her voice barely audible. What was I supposed to say? The answer cut deeper than their insults. It told me I was alone, even in my own marriage. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, their words looping in my head like a curse. Useless, weak, not a real man. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me started believing them, but their cruelty hadn't even reached its peak yet. What they had in store for me next would push me to a breaking point I didn't know existed. I started tiptoeing around my own home like it wasn't mine anymore. After that dinner, the silence between my wife and me became a wall I couldn't climb. I'd catch her on the phone with her mother, whispering just out of earshot. Every time the conversation ended, her eyes would dart away from mine like she'd been caught holding something sharp. One afternoon, as I was sending out yet another round of job applications, I overheard her mother's voice crackling through the speakerphone. "You married beneath you. He can't even keep a job. How long are you going to let him drag you down?" My wife didn't snap back. She just murmured, "I know, Mom," in a tone so soft it felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart hammering, my fingers curling into fists. That night at dinner I tried to act normal, but my appetite had evaporated. The clink of her fork against the plate was louder than her words. I asked, "Is that how you really feel?" She looked up, startled, then dropped her gaze back to her food. "It's complicated," she said, like that excused everything. The walls of our small apartment felt tighter, the air heavier. Even the furniture seemed to lean in with judgment. My laptop screen glowed back at me as rejection email after rejection email rolled in, and I started to wonder if they were right about me. Maybe I was dragging her down. Maybe I really was the failure they painted me to be. But somewhere deep inside, a seed of fury was growing, silent, hidden, but alive. I didn't know it yet, but that seed was going to change everything. The visits from my in-laws became constant, like they were circling a wounded animal. They would show up unannounced, ringing the bell with smug smiles, bringing groceries as if to remind me I couldn't provide. My mother-in-law would step into our kitchen and cluck her tongue, saying things like, "At least we can make sure she eats properly." Every word was dipped in venom, coated in fake sweetness. My father-in-law didn't bother with subtlety. He'd glance at my clothes and sneer, "Still wearing the same old shirt? Guess new jobs don't come with wardrobes." I would sit there gripping my coffee mug so tightly my knuckles turned white, biting my tongue until it almost bled. I thought my wife would stop them, tell them enough was enough, but instead she just shifted uncomfortably and said nothing. That silence was worse than their insults. It was her quiet permission. The final straw came one evening when her mother handed me a stack of envelopes and said, "Since you've proven irresponsible, let us manage the bills. It's better for everyone this way." I stared at her, my ears ringing, the words echoing in my skull. She was taking over my role, stripping me of the last shred of dignity I had left. My wife didn't protest. She just stood there, her arms folded, looking down at the floor. That night, I sat alone in the dark, the glow of my laptop illuminating the rejection emails that had piled up. The cursor blinked like a taunt on the empty search bar. For weeks I had been drowning, but something shifted inside me. Their cruelty had lit a fire I didn't even know I had. I wasn't going to beg for respect anymore. I was going to take it back, quietly, strategically, on my own terms, because if I stayed under their thumb much longer, I knew they'd crush me completely. Weeks of rejection had hardened me. But one morning, buried between the usual automated "we regret to inform you" emails, something different appeared. A subject line that read, "Interview invitation, marketing director position." My breath caught in my throat. I reread it twice, then 3 times just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. The job wasn't just a role. It was in another city, miles away from the suffocating grip of my in-laws. I didn't tell anyone. Not my wife, not my friends, not even my parents. For once, this victory would be mine alone, untainted by their opinions or pity. I started preparing obsessively, printing out practice questions, rehearsing answers in the mirror until my voice cracked. The apartment, usually heavy with silence and resentment, seemed to shift. The faint hum of the fridge, the glow of the desk lamp, even the creak of the floorboards became companions in my secret mission. The night before the interview, my wife noticed me ironing a shirt I hadn't worn in months. She raised an eyebrow. "Big plans?" she asked casually, but I brushed it off with a half smile. "Just want to look sharp." Inside, my heart was pounding like a war drum. For the first time in months, I wasn't drowning. I was swimming towards something. The morning of the interview, as I boarded the bus out of town, the city skyline shrinking in the window behind me, I felt a surge of energy so sharp it was almost painful. My stomach churned, my palms slick with sweat. But under all that anxiety burned something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I didn't know it yet. But that spark was about to collide head-on with another crushing blow before it had the chance to take flame. The night before my interview, my wife insisted we attend another one of her family's gatherings. I wanted to say no, to preserve my energy, but refusing would only make things worse. So I went, dressed in the same button-down I planned to wear tomorrow, trying to remind myself I had bigger things ahead. From the moment we arrived, I felt like prey, surrounded by predators. My father-in-law's booming laugh filled the room as he slapped me on the back. "Still unemployed, huh? Guess tomorrow's another day of Netflix and naps." The cousins snickered, their eyes darting to me with cruel amusement. My wife tried to change the subject, but her attempt was drowned out by her mother's sharp voice. "She deserves better. We all know it." The words sliced through the air like knives. Heat climbed up my neck, my ears ringing so loudly I could barely hear the rest of their mockery. I gripped the edge of my chair, nails digging into the wood, and forced myself to stay seated. Inside, I was unraveling. Every insult piled onto months of failure, rejection, and self-doubt until the weight became unbearable. When dessert was served, my father-in-law leaned in close, his breath heavy with alcohol. "Tell me, when do you plan on being a real man again?" The room roared with laughter. Something in me snapped. I stood abruptly, the chair screeching against the floor, and the laughter fell into stunned silence. My voice shook as I said, "I don't need to sit here and be humiliated." Then I walked out, leaving my wife staring after me, her face caught between shock and shame. Outside, the cool night air hit my skin, but it didn't calm me. My chest heaved, tears stung my eyes, and for the first time, I wondered if I was truly worth nothing. Tomorrow's interview felt like my last chance to claw back a shred of dignity. If I failed, I wasn't sure I'd have anything left. The next morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach, my father-in-law's words still echoing in my head like a curse. My shirt was wrinkled from being stuffed back in the closet after the disaster of last night. But I ironed it slowly, carefully, like each stroke was a way of pressing their voices out of my head. The bus ride to the interview felt endless, the vibration of the engine rattling my bones. But with each passing mile away from their house, I felt my chest loosen just a little. The office building in the new city gleamed in the sunlight, its glass panels reflecting a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. My palms were slick, and I could hear my heart thudding in my ears as I stepped into the lobby. The receptionist greeted me with a warm smile, and for a second I almost forgot how broken I felt. Sitting across from the hiring manager, I forced my voice to steady, answering each question like my life depended on it, because it did. When the interview wrapped up, the manager leaned forward, her eyes scanning my resume. "You know," she said, "you're exactly what we've been looking for." The words made my throat tighten. I nodded politely, but inside I wanted to collapse into tears of relief. Walking out of that building, sunlight pouring over me, I felt taller than I had in months. Later that evening, while my wife assumed I was at the library job hunting, I sat alone at a cafe, staring at the email that sealed everything. "We are pleased to offer you the position." My hands shook so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. It wasn't just a job. It was escape. It was proof that I wasn't the useless failure they wanted me to believe I was. But even in that moment of victory, I knew the hardest part wasn't landing the job. It was what would happen when I told my wife. When I finally worked up the courage to tell my wife about the job, I expected her face to light up, for her to hug me like the weight had lifted off both our shoulders. Instead, she just stared at me, lips parted, eyes wide. "Another city," she whispered, like I'd told her we were moving to the moon. I nodded, smiling nervously. "Yes, it's a real opportunity. Higher pay, benefits, everything we've been needing. We can finally start fresh." I reached for her hand, but she pulled it back slowly, folding her arms instead. But wait, what about my parents?" she said, her voice trembling. My stomach dropped. "What about them? They've done nothing but tear me down." Her eyes filled with tears, but not for me. "They're still my family. I can't just leave them behind." The cafe around us buzzed with chatter and clinking cups, but in that moment, everything went quiet. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. After months of humiliation, of being called worthless and treated like a burden, I thought she'd finally see the light. Instead, it was like she was still tethered to them, chained to their approval. I leaned back in my chair, my throat tight. "So you'd rather stay here and let them keep tearing me apart? Is that it?" She didn't answer. She just bit her lip, staring at the table like the wood grain was more important than my dignity. That night, lying beside her in silence, I realized the cruelest betrayal wasn't what her parents had said. It was that deep down, part of her believed them. And if she couldn't cut those strings, then this new beginning I'd fought so hard for might never even take root. The silence in our apartment was unbearable. I could hear the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, even the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I turned to her and said, "I need to know where you stand. Are you with me or with them?" She flinched, her eyes flashing with something between guilt and anger. "Why are you making me choose?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Because they've already chosen for you," I shot back. "Every time they've called me useless, every time they've tried to take over our lives, you sat there. You let it happen. And now, when I finally have a chance to give us a future, you're hesitating." "For them?" Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her face. "They're my parents. I can't just cut them off." The words hung in the air like poison. I wanted to scream, but instead my voice came out low, steady, almost frighteningly calm. "I don't need another parent in this marriage. I need a partner. If you can't be that, then maybe we don't belong together." Tears spilled down her cheeks, her shoulders shaking as she whispered, "I don't want to lose you." "Then don't," I replied, though my voice cracked on the last word. She sank onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. And for a moment I just stood there staring at her, feeling the weight of years crashing down on me. The woman I loved was torn between me and the people who despised me, and no matter what she said, I could feel how close we were to shattering. I walked into the bedroom, shutting the door softly behind me, my chest heavy with the knowledge that the next move would define everything: our marriage, our future, and whether I could ever look at her the same way again. The next few days blurred into one long, tense silence. My wife avoided my eyes, moving around the apartment like a shadow, and I threw myself into preparing for the move. Boxes lined the walls. My laptop glowed late into the night with lists of apartments and relocation details. Every time she glanced at the growing stacks, I could see the storm building inside her. But she didn't speak until the night I handed her the finalized job offer letter. She stared at it, her lips trembling. "So that's it? You've already decided without me?" I took a deep breath, my voice calm but firm. "I've decided for us. This is our way out. But if you can't come with me, I'll go alone." Her face twisted with hurt, but before she could reply, her phone buzzed. It was her mother. Against my better judgment, I listened as she answered on speaker. The venom poured through the line instantly. "He's dragging you away! Don't let him ruin your life any more than he already has." Something inside me snapped. I stepped forward and said loud enough for her mother to hear, "She's not your puppet, and I'm not your punching bag. This ends now." Then I hit the red button, cutting off the call. My wife gasped, covering her mouth, but I didn't flinch. The explosion came the next day. We went to pick up some of our things from her parents' house, and the moment we walked in, her father's voice boomed. "So you're stealing our daughter away to hide your failures? You think running off makes you a man?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply turned, picked up the last of our bags, and walked out without looking back. The silence I left behind was louder than any scream could have been, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to freedom. But I knew the final reckoning with them wasn't over yet. It was only waiting for its stage. Months passed, and our new life in the city began to take shape. The apartment was smaller, the streets noisier, but it was ours, untouched by judgmental eyes or uninvited visits. My job consumed me, but in the best way. Each paycheck, each project completed, was a reminder that I was not the failure they had branded me as. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe without the weight of their words pressing down on my chest. As our one-year anniversary approached, my wife and I decided to host a small celebration. Nothing extravagant, just a gathering of close friends to mark how far we had come. Word traveled quickly, though, and it wasn't long before her parents found out. One evening, her phone lit up with message after message, angry, demanding, dripping with entitlement. "We expect our invitations," her mother wrote. "We're family. You can't exclude us from your lives." I stared at the screen, a cold calm settling over me. For years, they had belittled me, stripped me of dignity, tried to convince me I was less than a man. And now, they wanted to raise a glass in our home, bask in a happiness they had worked so hard to destroy. I opened the guest list on my laptop, scrolled down to the section labeled Family, and deleted their names with a single click. Then, for good measure, I blocked their numbers from both of our phones. The weight that lifted in that moment was indescribable. When my wife asked if I was sure, I looked her in the eye and said, They don't get to celebrate what they tried to tear apart. She nodded slowly, and for the first time I saw no hesitation, only quiet agreement. But deep down, I knew the true victory wasn't just in blocking them. It was in finally realizing that I didn't need their approval to validate my worth. The night of our anniversary, the apartment buzzed with laughter and the warm clinking of glasses. Friends filled the space with stories, music played softly in the background, and for once, I felt like I was living in a home instead of a battlefield. I stood in the middle of that room, watching my wife laugh freely for the first time in months, and I realized something. We had built this joy on the ruins of everything they tried to destroy. Between conversations, I stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched out below me, alive and glittering, the air cool against my skin. I thought back to the nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, drowning in rejection and shame. Back then, I couldn't imagine feeling this light again. Now here I was, not just surviving, but thriving. My wife came out to join me, slipping her hand into mine. She whispered, "I'm glad you didn't back down." Her voice cracked slightly, and I knew she meant more than just the party. It was the first time she openly acknowledged what I had endured, and the weight of those words felt like a balm on old wounds. I didn't reply right away. I just looked out at the skyline and breathed. Then I said softly, "Sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting back, it's living so well they can't touch you." Inside, our friends cheered as someone raised a toast. The sound rolled out onto the balcony, wrapping around us like a promise. For the first time, I felt complete closure. Not because they apologized, not because they changed, but because I no longer needed them to. They had called me useless. Tonight, surrounded by proof that I was anything but, I realized I'd never let them define me again.